Analysis paralysis. That's pretty much been the theme for this project.
Until now.
This is my Mazda FD RX7, and I have a lot of plans for the car, many of which are continually evolving, but here's the current list and scope of the project. Firstly, the car is a 1993 R1 model with about 160,000 miles on the chassis. It was originally automatic, but I'll be converting it over to manual transmission. And while the exterior of the car is in fairly good shape, the rest of the car wasn't very well maintained. Now, the previous owner seems to have driven this car low and not so slow.
They ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
And unfortunately, most of the maintenance seems to have been a bit neglected. So we'll be going over this entire car from tip to butt, replacing or upgrading almost every component. Every gasket, seal, switch, sensor, relay, hose, and bolt will get inspected, replaced, or upgraded. After talking to a few rotary veterans and mechanics, I decided to open up the new engine and replace the factory apex seals. I want to go with something a little less fragile and more forgiving, just in case something goes wrong. Now, the engine will be the main focus for quite a while. Aside from the minor internal upgrades, everything on and around the engine will be new and modern. We'll be running the engine through a Haltech Nexus ECU and a Rywire tuck harness with a drive-by-wire conversion. The fuel system will be a full radium setup, including their drop-in surge tank, and power will come from a TurboSmart TS6262 mounted to an Arctic V-band manifold. There will be a huge focus on cooling. Obviously, heat is a huge issue for rotaries, so we'll be doing everything we can to keep that under control. Also, I work for CSF, so it would be rather embarrassing if the car overheated.
Oh, whoops. Whoopsie.
The current plan is to run a custom V-mount setup using a CSF bar and plate core for the intercooler and a CSF Rywire tuck radiator. For oil cooling, we'll be running a dual cooler setup run in parallel with a remote mounted thermostat and oil filter housing. We'll also be converting the AC system to an R134A setup using an RX8 condenser and compressor. I'll also be overhauling the whole suspension, brakes, drivetrain, and eventually the interior. Now, the full list is far too long to rattle off here, so I've included a link in the description to my parts spreadsheet where you can see what I have or will be ordering. Everything I just mentioned has been agonized over. Some for weeks, others months, and some things took years to make a final decision on. Analysis paralysis has literally plagued me since I picked up the car almost exactly 8 years ago back in California. At the time, it had been years since I had a proper project car. My last project was a V6 swapped MR2 that I had sold in 2010, and I was really into MR2s back then, but never got to build one the way I really wanted to, mainly because I was on a budget due to being young at the time, and also we were in a post-crash economy. So when my wife finally came around to the idea of letting me have a project car, I was pumped. I was finally going to get to build something that I really wanted to. However, I wanted to find something that wasn't going to lose value and depreciate like my previous two builds. My previous fun cars were basically money pits, with the only redeeming grace being hookups on parts I got because of work. So that really pointed me in the direction of something classic. Outside of some niche cars that I frankly couldn't afford, anything newer seemed pretty much doomed to depreciate heavily. The first cars on my list that I presented my wife were mostly 90s JDM cars.
Luca! Bueno?
All of which she immediately shot down. Long story short, she didn't see the value in them, both fiscally or emotionally, so I moved on with a heavy heart. I then started looking at 60s and 70s cars I felt like I could afford. At the time, almost anything from the 60s was getting really expensive, so I had pretty much settled on a C3 Corvette, which I had personally kind of always had a thing for, when something changed. At the time, my wife worked in an office building that overlooked a small diner. Every Thursday morning, a group of older men would drive in around 9 a.m., they'd have brunch, and then hang out in the parking lot with their classic cars. One Thursday, though, she brought them up in a conversation saying she can totally see me doing this with my friends when I'm old. And I'm gonna stop you right there. Don't you dare go in the comments and make a joke about me being old already. I'm not that old yet. Anyways, I thought this was really sweet, but I made a comment about how those aren't our generation's classics. Our classics were going to be the 90s JDM and Euro cars that I've pined over for so long, followed by a very crestfallen look.
He looked at me like this.
And that did it, boys. She caved. And I was on fucking cloud 9. That was until she hit me with the, but I get to choose which one.
Oh.
I once again compiled my list of 90s JDM classics. Now, I scrutinized over this list extensively, knowing it might be the last chance I have to get one of the cars I really wanted. After a couple weeks of overthinking and making sure I considered every option, I narrowed the list down to the following. Another SW20 MR2, the Nissan Z32 300ZX, a DSM Eclipse, Honda S2000, Mark IV Supra, the FD RX7, and Acura NSX. I hadn't been given a budget yet, so I was swinging for the fences.
Oh well, can't blame a guy for trying.
One by one, she shot them all down, all except the RX7. Now, I immediately started scouring the internet for an FD that was in my newly defined but somewhat meager budget. After a couple months of looking and checking out a few that I had to pass on, someone tagged me in an Instagram post of a local one for sale for about $8,000. I immediately left work and drove to Costa Mesa to check it out. While it wasn't perfect, it had a clean title and was in good condition overall. Being unsure if I'd find a better deal, I decided to pull the trigger and had it towed home that weekend. While the car technically ran when I bought it, it was spewing out a ton of white smoke, so I was confident one of the coolant seals isn't blown, which was part of the reason it was relatively cheap. At the time, I was eager to get the car running and had a buddy that was a bit of an LS enthusiast. He was strongly encouraging me to do a swap, and I kind of gave in. Oddly enough, that was probably the last time I wasn't struck by any kind of analysis paralysis. So I pulled out the 13B along with some questionable modifications by the previous owner. Oh my god, what the fuck is that? Ghetto as shit you find on cars. Like, what? Oh my god, does it say? Wow. Wow. And shortly after, I found an LS1 with a T56 for about $3,000 on Marketplace or Craigslist. I don't really remember. But I drove to the guy's house, checked it out, paid him, and called my buddy to borrow his truck so I could haul it back. As fate would have it, the guy backed out while I was waiting for my buddy's truck, and needless to say, I was a little bit disappointed. I'd been on that high you get when you get a new car, and all I wanted to do was get the car running and driving. However, after getting over disappointment, I started to reflect on what I really wanted out of the car, so I decided to hold off on making a decision for the time being. Also, my wife kindly reminded me that this was supposed to be a long-term project. So I started deep diving into the rotary world, watching videos from the likes of Rob Dahm, Rad Potential, Moto IQ, and many others. I started to come around to the idea of keeping the car rotary, but kept struggling with the scope and cost of the project. This was stage one of my analysis paralysis. I spent more hours than I'd like to admit on YouTube and the forums trying to decide if I really wanted to take on a rotary project. And then life just kept happening as I struggled with the decision of what to do with the car. In 2019 we got a puppy, and holy crap, I was not prepared for the amount of time that would eat up. This is Eva, by the way. She said if you're enjoying the video so far, we would greatly appreciate a like and maybe even a subscribe. Next thing you know, it's 2020 and COVID sends the world into a tailspin, and yet another year passes without me doing anything to the car. I did, however, get to watch Ben from Gears and Gasoline build his K-swapped FD during that time, which sent me down a whole nother rabbit hole and even more analysis paralysis. Then in 2021, my wife and I decided to make a big change in our lives and move from Santa Ana, California to Portland, Oregon. However, because of how competitive the housing market was back then, we ended up buying a property that needed a lot of work. So the car just continued to sit while I did house projects. I've overhauled most of our backyard over the last 4 years while still trying to make decisions on what to do with the RX-7. I did make one big decision during that time though, which was to keep the car rotary. And towards the end of 2022, I picked up a brand new crate engine from Mazda while they were still fairly affordable. And then it sat for 3 more years. In those 3 years, I flip-flopped between whether or not to restore the factory twin turbo system or check out all the complicated bits and convert to single turbo. And by now, I'm sure you're starting to see the pattern of my analysis paralysis. When 2025 was about to roll around, I decided it was finally time to start working on the car. I started making plans over the holidays to start working on the car in January when life happened again. My parents were one of many that lost their home in the Eaton Canyon fire that destroyed most of Altadena. My family was devastated, and my parents lost pretty much everything. Thankfully, they made it out safely, but it drastically changed my priorities for the rest of the year. That brings us to now. After almost 8 years, I finally started working on the car over the holidays and creating content. After a few weeks of not working on the car while on vacation, I finally decided to go with my original plan of cleaning out the engine bay and getting it ready for paint. Sometimes you just gotta pick a route and run with it, right? And it sucked. The thing is dirty, crusty, and a little rusty, so it was in desperate need of attention. Because this bit is mostly labor, it's the most cost-effective thing on the to-do list, but it's also the most boring and tedious. On the upside, it does allow me to save up a bit for the next wave of parts, and buys me a little time to make decisions on said parts. After this, we'll be moving on to the old engine, where we have to pull everything off and clean up the parts that we can and will be reusing. Like I've said before, the goal for the car is to have the most reliable setup I can afford that I can take anywhere my heart desires. I want to do events like the Overcrest Rally, drive down to California to cruise with the boys, and maybe even take into an event like 7 Stock. I want this car to be refined and comfortable, but not so nice that I'm scared to drive it. It's very tempting to want to show car look and finish on everything, but I don't want to be upset by every rock, chip, or scratch that I find after an adventure or other activities.
You mean shenanigans? No!
Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this backstory and broad project overview. If you're interested in learning along with me as we go over all the parts, the reasons for each choice, and all the other nerdy details, follow along and we'll go down the rotary rabbit hole together. Feel free to leave me a comment with any tips, questions, or constructive criticism. Honestly, the feedback and encouragement I've gotten has really helped keep me motivated, so thank you. And now, it's time to deal with this.